Call of Duty Infinite Warfare has a very interesting reputation in the Call of Duty community. It is a record holder for the most dislikes on any Call of Duty trailer, so the reception obviously when the game was announced was really good. But honestly, it was no real surprise that Call of Duty Infinite Warfare was completely destroyed by fans when it was initially announced. I mean, Call of Duty Advanced Warfare was mostly an okay game, and people really did enjoy the new movement mechanics at the time because it was different. But by the time Advanced Warfare had run its cycle, people were already wanting Call of Duty to take a step back and go back to the typical boots on the ground gameplay. I remember even when Black Ops 3 was announced, there was already some fans that were pretty upset because they were still going to have some sort of advanced movement in the game. But even then, with Black Ops 3, the movement system was slightly tweaked, so fans still gave it a try and for the most part stuck around with the game, and it did pretty well. But by the time that Black Ops 3 had mostly run its course, fans were really wanting Call of Duty to go back to the typical boots on the ground gameplay. And in early 2016, for the most part, fans were pretty sure that the next Call of Duty game made by Infinity Ward would be Call of Duty Ghosts 2. It made sense because Call of Duty Ghosts ended on a cliffhanger. Infinity Ward was known for making the more modern era Call of Duty games. The whole Call of Duty franchise as a whole had been just in the future for the past 4 iterations. And obviously, if the next Call of Duty was to do well, it made sense for Activision to go ahead and do something different to get people interested in the game. And boy, they really didn't do that. The announcement of Call of Duty Infinite Warfare alone is a really great example of how Activision just completely has been disconnected from the community in what they wanted out of a franchise. But either way, later on that year, Infinite Warfare released and bombed. Yeah, sales for Call of Duty Infinite Warfare were not good. But despite all the outrage from fans based off of the marketing that they used, was the game actually that bad, or was there a silver lining to this game, and how does this game hold up in 2019? Let's go ahead and take a look. So Call of Duty Infinite Warfare takes players to the distant future, where humanity had completely stripped the Earth of all of its resources, leading to many private corporations to try to hold a monopoly on interplanet resource gathering. As humanity as a whole rapidly expanded and began to colonize other planets, a group of resurgents gained power over important locations and essentially obtained the power to become an opposing military force. I'll spare you the other political details that are involved in this story, as for the most part it's not too interesting, but players take on the role of Captain Reyes, who is in charge of leading a ship, I think. He later gets promoted to commander, and honestly, he still gets told what to do, but that's besides the point. For the most part, the Call of Duty Infinite Warfare campaign experience is pretty typical Call of Duty campaign as a whole. The setting, of course, is in outer space, which is different from what we've seen in other Call of Duty games, but the pacing, story structure, and general idea of just having one centric antagonist is kind of repeated here. Of course, it's obvious that for the most part, Infinite Warfare probably has to stick to a general template that's popular for the Call of Duty games, as Activision oversees that. But since this is the first Call of Duty game developed on a full 3-year cycle, you can tell that Infinity Ward actually did put a lot of effort into trying to make this campaign stand out as opposed to other Call of Duty games. While the level design isn't necessarily awe-inspiring, some of the settings that players go to, the atmospheres and environments are really unique, but at the end of the day, it's mostly you just walk around, you shoot people, you move up to the next room, and then of course there's the occasional cool level where you do something different. One thing that Infinity Ward did really well here that they evolved upon from their previous Call of Duty game, Call of Duty Ghosts, is that they actually developed a cast of pretty likable characters. Outside of the main protagonist that you play as, who's pretty one-dimensional, and the antagonist who honestly just doesn't have any character whatsoever, and his motives are still relatively unclear even at the end of the game. All the in-between characters were kind of given their own time to shine, and in a way, this game leaves players feeling attached to these characters. The dialogues between characters and the cutscenes are actually not that corny, especially considering Call of Duty Ghosts had some of the corniest moments in the entire Call of Duty franchise. And in a way, this game did a really good job at developing a set of characters that you cared about. It's just relatively unfortunate unfortunate that the plot doesn't really seem to go anywhere or have any real purpose. As you play the game, there's a ton of foreshadowing as to what's coming up, and issues arise and new conflicts are introduced, but it always feels like they kind of settle themselves. It's never an impending sense of threat. Either one of the other characters will fix whatever's causing the conflict, or just something occurs that leads into the next thing. Still, despite this weird quirk in the plot and stuff, the campaign itself actually is a pretty standout game, and while Infinite Warfare gets bashed on a whole, it actually feels like this game, had it not had the Call of Duty branding with it, probably would have been received a lot better, especially because the single player is overall pretty good, but when you compare it into the entire history of Call of Duty and the fact that this was the Call of Duty of the year, it doesn't even hold a light up to the things that they did in the Modern Warfare trilogy or the early Black Ops games. I keep finding myself with Call of Duty Infinite Warfare wishing that it wasn't a Call of Duty game. Had this game just been its own thing, it probably would have had more of an opportunity to be a little bit more successful. As we shift gears to the multiplayer, we know that development on this game started sometime in 2014, which was when Advanced Warfare released, and most likely since Black Ops 3 was further along in development than this game, it really seems like Infinite Warfare borrowed a ton of elements from what Treyarch was doing. Of course, they tried the best they can to make this game completely their own by pushing the game into the more futuristic setting, but at the end of the day, the multiplayer just feels identical to Black Ops 3, for better or worse, especially if you've seen our Black Ops 3 years later video. Yeah, the movement system is refined still from the Advanced Warfare movement system, but the maps just still aren't really on point to what this game needs from this type of gameplay. Infinity Ward really tied the series back and finally returned to the 3-lane map design that was popularized in the older Call of Duty games, especially because Call of Duty Ghosts completely overhauled the way that maps worked, and that was one of its biggest criticisms, but it really feels like they didn't have the best grasp on how to incorporate the vertical movement that was now introduced, which makes a lot of the pathways feel extremely linear and forced, and not so much something that you can easily use strategy to approach other enemies. What I find really interesting is the fact that this is a futuristic war game, and the campaign has all these elements of outer space battling and ships and all these other really cool ideas, but the multiplayer just sticks to what Call of Duty's always done. It's like Activision gave Infinity Ward the freedom to do what they wanted in the campaign, as long as it was mostly the same to what they do in campaigns, but then didn't give them that same freedom in multiplayer and made them make a very basic Call of Duty game that was like Black Ops 3. I find it really weird that if it's the distant future, why are the guns exactly the same as the same guns that we've had in all of the modern era and future era Call of Duty games that we've seen? Yeah, the gun has a different name, but you can easily tell that this gun looks exactly like the UMP-40, and it shoots the same way too. It's like, yeah, there's a couple of energy weapons here and there, but you can also tell that for the most part the guns just stick to what Call of Duty knows. While the campaign went to some really unique environments and atmospheres, the multiplayer has very generic looking maps. There's usually something large and huge happening on them, but there wasn't a feeling of variety on each map in the same way that there was in Black Ops 3. It just felt, hey, this is a space-themed map, or this is another planet. Sure, there was one or two good maps in there, but as a whole, the map design was kind of lacking. And if you needed further evidence that this game took a lot from the Black Ops 3, they even kind of reintroduced specialists that were introduced for the first time in Black Ops 3, but they called them combat rigs instead. At the core of it all, this multiplayer game is pretty much on par of what Black Ops 3 did, but I'm still left wondering if they were going to push the boundaries and going way into the future, why didn't they go all in here? Why didn't they incorporate something completely new, like something in the manner of what Titanfall did with its series? It just feels like the game was trying to be ambitious and play it safe for all the wrong reasons at the same time. And oh my god, they decided to try to release DLC remakes of some Infinity Ward maps, and outside of what was maybe the biggest travesty in the remake of Outskirts from World at War in Black Ops 3, I've never seen such a terrible remake or reimagination of some of the greatest Call of Duty maps in franchise history. They took maps like Afghan and Rust from Modern Warfare 2 and completely stretched them out and tried to tweak them to give them this outer spacey futuristic vibe, but by making the map bigger, it completely disrupted the flow that made the map great originally. It takes significantly longer to run from one space to the other, and maybe that's to adjust for the newer movement, but it breaks up the entire flow of the map and what made the map great in the first place. And I'm not talking slightly bigger, this is noticeably larger than what the classic maps were. And that's really just scratching the surface on what they did with this game. They took maps like Resistance from Modern Warfare 3 and Terminal, that was in both Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3, and just kind of gave it a really terrible treatment. It's really disappointing as a longtime Call of Duty fan to see that they are just really trying to use things as marketing ploys to get you to buy a game. And with that, that's kind of exactly what they did when they tried to make you buy the special edition of the game and spend more money so you could play Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare Remastered early. But we can save that whole debacle for a completely different video. This is also one of the first Infinity Ward games to ever introduce a zombie mode into their Call of Duty game, which is kind of surprising to me because it would have been way cooler had they done an Extinction mode, especially with the outer space theme and the fact that Extinction was something that they had made in Call of Duty Ghosts, which used aliens. I'm just saying, there's a huge missed opportunity right here that they could have tried to do something really interesting. But of course, zombies is kind of starting to become a staple in Call of Duty as a whole, so they probably needed to make their own zombie game type. So what does zombies look like in the far future with an outer space theme? Well, I don't know, because they decided not to go that way at all. Instead, we get Zombies in Spaceland, which is a zombies map that has an 80s theme park theme to it. And while the overall premise of it is kind of weird, and they did do something with somewhat of a detached story that was on its own that takes place obviously hundreds of years before the events of the campaign, while I'm usually pretty critical about zombie maps, I actually genuinely enjoyed Zombies in Spaceland. I thought the environment that they chose and the level design was actually really good for a zombies map. The level was linear enough where you could find your way pretty quickly, but also had some pretty decent holdout spots. Sure, there's Easter eggs you can go after if that's your thing, and there's a lot to figure out with getting the power turned on, and actually I prefer Zombies in Spaceland more than a lot of the zombies maps that Treyarch has done in the past. In more recent years, it feels like Zombies has shifted away from a horde survival game type into more of a can you complete the Easter egg without dying challenge. And while that's great for the people who really like the Easter eggs, as an older Call of Duty fan who really got into zombies because of the World at War maps or the Black Ops maps, when a zombies map gets overly complicated, it kind of turns me off from enjoying it. I felt like Zombies in Spaceland kind of skirted right around with having the best of both worlds here. The map was really cool with its theme. The guns were easy to buy and figure out and survive off of, and there was a lot of places that you could just hold out and see what level you got to. I can't say too much for the DLC as I didn't want to spend money on a multiplayer DLC pack because the multiplayer is kind of boring, but from the looks of what was released, it actually looked like the zombie maps were pretty consistently unique and followed kind of the same trend set in Zombies in Spaceland. At the end of the day, I want to commend Infinity Ward for what they wanted to do. As you can tell, they did put a lot of effort into the campaign side of things, and I don't think it's as much Infinity Ward's fault as it is Activision's fault as a whole. There was, and still is, a clear disconnect between what the corporation is doing and what the fans actually want. And because of that, Call of Duty has been suffering for years, and Infinite Warfare kind of was the tip of the spear that started this hemorrhaging in the Call of Duty franchise. And trust me, it doesn't get any better from here. Call of Duty World War II comes out a year later, and I got some strong words to say about that game. But overall, we're gonna go ahead and give Call of Duty Infinite Warfare a C-. There are some really great things, and some of the ambitions in this game were really well done, but at the end of the day, the campaign doesn't do anything special enough, and the multiplayer is just not a great experience. There's so many better Call of Duty games that you can hop on, and when you look at this game in light of the Call of Duty franchise as a whole, it just doesn't hold up. I almost wish Activision would have let this game have the room to grow on its own and not be associated with the Call of Duty brand, but that never happened. Zombies was fun though. Today you can get this game used for pretty cheap, and you can usually find it in a bundle on digital stores. There is still a smaller player base playing this game, but you're not gonna have as much of a community like you would see in Black Ops 3 or Advanced Warfare. If you're a new Xbox or PlayStation player and you're looking for something with great visuals, this Call of Duty game actually does look really good. I'd actually go as far to say that it looks better than Call of Duty World War II and Black Ops 4. So it's one of the better visually looking games, and with whatever Infinity Ward is working on that we're gonna see later on this year, hopefully they've had an opportunity to grow from this experience and make something else that will be as ambitious, but maybe they'll have the freedom to actually really make it their own game. But who am I kidding? Call of Duty's dead. Activision's gonna make them make Modern Warfare 4. People are gonna buy it and then be disappointed that it's not the same Modern Warfare experience that they remembered from back in the day, and I'm just gonna go back to playing Modern Warfare 2 on my Xbox. Alright, that's it for today. If you guys like this video, hit the like button down below. Leave a comment. Were you one of the fans that were able to get behind Infinite Warfare? Maybe you actually really got down with this game. Let us know down below. There is a tight-knit community who did like this game, so if you're one of them, no hate to you, but if you weren't, let us know what your favorite Call of Duty game is. Where did Call of Duty go wrong? What was the pinnacle of Call of Duty? Let us know down below, and be sure to subscribe for more coverage like this. Call of Duty World War II is up next in this Call of Duty series, but we've done all of the other Call of Duty games up to date, more or less, with the exception of some older ones, and we'll see you all next time with a brand new video.